welcome back to America Decides. What I'm about to read won't surprise you. President Trump says he has not asked the leader of El Salvador to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States. That's not really shocking. But the president made that comment in a lengthy 100 days interview with Time magazine. Interestingly, when asked about his refusal to bring back Abrego Garcia and how it's playing politically, the president said, quote, "I think this is another men in women's sports thing for the Democrats." Mychael Schnell and Tom LoBianco, Mychael Schnell and Tom LoBianco join me now. Mychael is a congressional reporter for The Hill. Tom, founder and editor of 24 Site News. So, Mychael, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
You've written extensively about House Democrats, as I understand mostly, maybe some Senate Democrats, how they're evaluating not only the conversation about immigration in the Trump administration, but about Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Politically, this is such an interesting phenomenon because both parties seem to be leaning into this issue. Republicans, the NRCC saying, we'll send any House Democrat to El Salvador as long as they live stream the entire thing. House Democrats, Senator Chris Van Hollen, going to El Salvador to try and meet with Abrego Garcia. But there's starting to be this conversation and even debate within the Democratic Party of, is this the issue we should be leaning into? Is this worthy of our time at the moment? Now, nobody is questioning the constitutional concerns with President Trump not facilitating the return of Abrego Garcia, as the Supreme Court had said.
Due process, invoking state secret.
That's right.
All these sorts of things that are slow walking or borderline defying federal court orders in this matter. Right.
Nobody's questioning that. But once you get beyond that part of it, there are real questions of, are Democrats best spent with their time right now talking about a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador, or should we be talking about kitchen table issues, the stock market tumbling, the rising cost of prices? We just had Easter when eggs was the foremost focus, and the price of eggs is higher right now. Should folks be talking about that? There's this developing debate within the Democratic Party, and it could increase and be more public in the coming days and weeks.
Tom, your sense of all this?
It reminds me so much, that answer, it's very classic Trump, where, later in that interview, he said, well, I don't know, I have to ask my lawyer, I go with what my lawyer says.
I might be open to it, bringing Kilmar Abrego Garcia back.
Maybe not. It reminds me so much, and, people who have been in and out of Trump world over a decade now of him in politics would always say this: he hates confrontation. And it's really remarkable, right? And, we talked about this before, the buck stops where? Well, my lawyer, maybe. Kind of depends upon what, Bukele says. I don't know.
The leader of El Salvador. Yeah, Bukele.
It was really shocking to me because, and, it also, relates to Ukraine here, too, because it's like, well, okay, maybe not.
Right.
All right.
Speaking of Ukraine, I want to remind the audience with the miracle of sound bites we keep around in our archives from the campaign. What then candidate Trump said about what would happen if he won the election, and Ukraine and Russia. Let's listen.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled.
Settled. Well, just yesterday on social media, Vladimir, stop, was the social media post from the president of the United States, leader of the free world.
Not exactly high-level diplomacy, strategic deal-making here. I think, and it's really helpful to see how other nations are reacting to this, to see how Europe is reacting to this. Remember, it wasn't that long ago where you kind of had multiple fronts, and a lot of the European leaders were saying, look, if you want to deal with China, we have to deal with Ukraine first, because we are there. All right, this is our, we are right next to this. And you're starting to see, and you started to see this, months ago with that disastrous White House the Oval Office meeting, where the European nations are starting to step in to handle this themselves. You're seeing arms deals, arms stocks in these European nations starting to go up. And in a global sense, it really starts to show what you saw with the President of the United States tweeting a scream.
Right.
Please,
Almost.
Yeah.
That was the only word that wasn't there. Please
Yes.
stop, Vladimir. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was implied. It was
Yeah.
implied. Mychael, George Santos was sentenced today. Our audience may well remember the sagas of short-lived member of Congress, Republican from New York, George Santos. Read us out on that.
7 years, 3 months behind bars. That's what the sentencing was. It was actually exactly what prosecutors had asked for. Prosecutors had argued that he wasn't remorseful, that despite pleading guilty, entering into this plea deal, they actually cited his social media posts.
Right, and saying in that pleading he was remorseful, then
That's
going
right.
on social media and
doing essentially the exact opposite. So George Santos on Long Island this afternoon, sentenced to that 7 years, 3 months. Such an interesting moment. The story of George Santos has been fascinating. He was elected to that New York district in November of 2022, seen as a Republican trailblazer, the first gay Republican to be elected as a non-incumbent in the House. For just weeks later, the New York Times breaking the story about his fabricated past and really everything unraveling from there, culminating with that December 2023 expulsion from the House, etching his name in history books as just the 6th person in the House to ever be expelled. So a fascinating story. I think a lot of folks are wondering now, is he going to be looking for a pardon from President Trump? He's been very effusive in his admiration for President Trump. He did give an interview to the New York Times yesterday. He said he wouldn't be seeking that out, but that's going to be the next saga, the next chapter to watch, rather, in this saga.
And Mychael, it's worth recalling that when the allegations surfaced and when the process was going on, both with federal prosecutors and the House Ethics Committee, Santos's denials were unequivocal,
That's right.
absolute, and very Trumpian.
Yes, he was not standing down. He was, in fact, standing up to the charges, saying, I'm going to have my day in court. I am going to fight this. But then, of course, a few months ago, he arrived back at that centralized slip courtroom, and he pled guilty.
And, Tom, a reminder, it seems to me, to all Republicans, there is one Trump and only one Trump.
Yes. The rules of gravity, the rule of law, applies.
Right.
Clearly. Yeah, you can't just go around saying you're Jewish, when you get called out on it, as Santos did, of course, famously. No, and that's this weird dichotomy because, I was looking at Santos, and it's, as Mychael points out here, when you're under oath, you say one thing because you're under oath, presumably the truth, because there are repercussions for not speaking the truth under oath.
Perjury is one of the repercussions. Yes.
Yes. But then go on social media and completely contradict yourself, which could presumably be used in court again. And there's this, you see this in all levels of politics now. It's diffused throughout politics, where politics and performative politics is really divorced from reality. Mm-hmm. In a way that 10 years ago, I would argue even 5 years ago,
Right.
was not the case.
And there are risks involved to wagging a disdainful finger in the face of prosecutors on social media. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they have an answer back. They get a chance to talk to the judge about what may or may not happen to you. And George Santos today found out. Mychael Schnell, Tom LoBianco, thanks for coming in.